Josie, then you'll love it. It's basically about this figure in Greek mythology called Clytemnestra, who was basically like the OG tough girl, because she was like a Spartan and like the sister of Helen of Troy as well, and it's really good.
Oh, fantastic. Right, this is now, Gabby, just tell us the name and title, I'm afraid, because we're going to kick off.
Yeah. One of my favourites from this year is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, which is another fantasy. Really good. Made me cry.
Thank you. And Mubarak.
Mine is Stoner by John Williams.
Oh, I love that book. Brilliant book. Classic. Oh, well, thank you. And thank you all on the chat. I can't wait to read these through all of afterwards, because there's an amazing array. We'll download the chat afterwards and make sure that we include some of these recommendations. So welcome, everybody. We're going to kick off because I'm really conscious of timing at the moment. And we've got an hour and we've got multiple questions that we've been asked. And we're going to get the opportunity to ask questions. So I would say to our amazing panel, please keep your answers short. Try not to ramble so we can get through as many questions as possible, because we can see already that we're going to get dozens. So listen, really excited to meet you all. My name's Josie and I am one of the founders of Creative Access. And for those of you that don't know us, we are a social enterprise and our mission is to support people from communities that are underrepresented across the creative industries to enter and then work in the creative industries. So we do that through lots of things, through recruitment, through training, through mentoring, through all sorts of different outreach. And we have one of our very first partners ever, and indeed our first ever publishing partner, was Penguin Random House. And in fact, one of our panelists who will introduce shortly, Melissa, is one of our earliest trainees. But we are really thrilled to be working this work in publishing with Penguin Random House on this event. We know how popular publishing is and how difficult it can be as a career to kind of understand where the breadth of the roles and the breadth of opportunities. So we hope today you'll get a chance to really understand some of the sorts of roles out there you may not have considered, and equally some of the ways that you might most usefully pursue a career. If you do want to follow us, we'll be live tweeting the event and we'll be doing a write-up, and we'll put all the resources on our website and our YouTube channel afterwards. In the meantime, you can follow us on @_creativeaccess on Twitter and Instagram. We'll send some more resources around afterwards, and we've got some fantastic signposting from Penguin Random House as well. So what I would just ask you all to do, please, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see there is a chat function and there is a Q&A function. Now, you've all been very kindly talking in the chat function, which is great, but if you have a question for the panel, please only put that in the Q&A function. And if the rest of you watching, you can upvote the questions. So if you see something that you are interested in and one of the questions you particularly want answered, upvote it and we'll make sure that we cover that. So we're going to move to audience Q&As in about half an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're just going to move over to our panel now for them to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about some of the questions that you've pre-submitted. And thank you very much for doing that. We've got a really phenomenal group here. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves individually. And first up, I'm going to introduce the wonderful Mubarak, who is one of our alumni and head of digital marketing and brand at Penguin. So Mubarak, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying a little bit about myself, and then we'll kind of go around and ask everyone about themselves. So if we start by saying our name and job title. So my name is Mubarak. I'm the head of digital marketing and brand at Penguin Michael Joseph. And I grew up in East Sussex. I was studying pharmacy at university before I wanted a career change. And I took an internship at Pan Macmillan through Creative Access 2016. And I've had various publishing jobs since then, but I'd say I've been in a continuous process of working and learning kind of ever since then. Should we go to Melissa next?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Melissa. I'm the sales manager at Vintage. I started my publishing journey as a Creative Access intern back in 2013, so almost 10 years ago, and did an internship job there, and then moved into publishing fully with a full-time job. I've worked in international sales, I've worked in children's sales, I've worked in adult sales, and now I am at Vintage as a sales manager.
Should we go to Gabby?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Gabby. I'm an editorial assistant working on PRH audio and also the BBC audio imprint. I grew up in Greater London and I studied philosophy and politics at Southampton. I graduated in 2020, so it took me quite a long time to get my first role in publishing, but I also did an internship in publicity with Creative Access at an indie publisher, and then got my job at Penguin about a year ago now.
Fantastic. Priyanka?
Hi, I'm Priyanka. So I was, like Gabby, also graduated in 2020. I have been born and brought up in London. I'm currently international communications assistant at Penguin Random House UK. So basically, I work across all PRH UK divisions. I studied comparative literature at uni and then went on to do a master's in creative writing and publishing.
Fantastic. And Candy?
Hi everyone, I'm Candy. I'm the brand marketing manager looking at youth engagement at Penguin. I'm part of the brand division, which is the central division looking after the Penguin brand. I was a creative access intern back in 2014, 2015, and I started my career in operations at Little Brown. And I studied law at university, but was looking at either becoming a lawyer or going into one of the creative sectors and chose publishing.
Fantastic. If we can go into kind of what our job titles mean, because I think for us it's quite obvious, but for anyone who kind of hasn't worked in publishing, it's anything other than editor kind of might seem a bit alien. So if we kind of go through what our responsibilities are or what a typical day looks like, if we start with you, Candy.
Sure. So I work, so Penguin has a number of different divisions that have different specialisms, but my specific division is the brand division, whereby we look after the Penguin brand, which is a sort of consumer facing brand. So we're trying to appeal to people and as well as market our books and just market reading as a hobby to the general population. My specific remit is to bring young people, specifically teenagers, into the Penguin Random House ecosystem. And that includes through social media, that includes talent prizes, includes a lot of our Lit in Colour campaign, which is our campaign to diversify the curriculum. And most of my time is taken up by looking after Penguin's sub-brand Penguin platform, whereby we make a lot of content and have a lot of events and activities to bring young people into Penguin and create lifelong readers, essentially. But that's my day-to-day role and what it entails. So my day-to-day is very much kind of across a number of different projects with that objective.
Fantastic, very busy. Priyanka?
Yeah, so I think my title is something that people may not have heard of because like I didn't even know that international sales or international comms was a thing when I first started looking for entry-level jobs. So comms, for anyone who doesn't know, communications basically just means marketing and publicity combined. And our team is basically split up in comms between territories and divisions. So we'll have people who look after certain divisions of Penguin Random House UK, as well as certain territories. So we have Europe, Asia, and rest of world. And one of our team members also looks after PRH UK group companies, which are basically PRH Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, etc. And so I look after export territories. So that's Europe, Asia, and rest of world. And I assist the team with essentially being a liaison for Penguin Random House UK to those export customers. So like sending on marketing assets that the PRH UK team have made to certain customers, organizing review copies, helping organize interviews, but also taking on my own projects like designing assets myself and managing our international newsletter. So that's kind of what my day-to-day looks like, similarly to Candy, with a few extra larger projects built in.
Fantastic. And Gabby?
So I'm sort of the opposite to Priyanka in that I think a lot of people know what editorial does. But my job in editorial, because it's an audio, is quite different to other editors' jobs. So on the BBC side of our list, we're taking archived BBC content and curating that into collections to then sell to people to buy. And then on the Penguin audio side, the team is responsible for deciding which books get made into audiobooks and also then casting those audiobooks. So it's quite a different editorial role to the traditional one. A lot of my role is admin focused, but I also get to help with managing projects for our publishing director. And on the BBC side, I've started to commission a few of my own projects, which is really fun. But on a sort of weekly, daily basis, I'm writing copy, getting to brief covers, coding lots and lots of invoices, checking information on retailer websites, all those good things, and checking introductions and outros to our audio files as well quite often. So there's a few things that are unique to audio as well as the classic admin jobs.
Fantastic. Melissa?
Yeah, I want to start by debunking what I think a lot of people think sales is, which is like a man on the phone with his feet on the table being like, I'll sell you 1 million units of something. And it's not like that at all. My job is a lot about relationship building. It's about relationship building with retailers, relationship building with buyers at supermarkets, at Waterstones, at Smiths. And that, you know, that's not just for UK sales, and that's what our international sales colleagues do with their customers and our digital sales colleagues do as well. So part of my job is about building those relationships, talking to them about the books that we think are going to sell through those retailers, and thinking about ways that we can make them stand out with those retailers as well. So, you know, if you go into a Waterstones, you'll see a sprayed edge or an exclusive edition, or you know, a different color or way on the jacket or something like that. That's something that often comes out of sales conversations with those retailers. And the other part of my job is about bringing all that sort of feedback and market knowledge that the retailers giving us and that we can see in the sales data and all that kind of stuff into internal meetings and into internal publishing strategies. So when we're publishing a book, who are we publishing it for, but also what retailers do we think it's going to sit in? And if we're thinking it's going to be sitting in a supermarket or an independent bookshop, what do we need to do to make sure with, you know, with the cover, with the marketing, with the publicity, with everything that we do, what do we need to do to make sure it sort of it works there and it works for those retailers and it's ultimately appealing to the consumers that are shopping in those retailer outlets as well. So that's my job.
Fantastic. Yeah, and my job, so I run a few campaigns, a few marketing campaigns. So that's everything from the proofs, which are early reading copies, to POS, the kind of stuff that you see on the store, to the digital adverts and everything between. So I run some campaigns and look at the overall digital strategy, both paid and organic. And on the branding side, there's brand partnerships. There's kind of everything that you see that's branded with Penguin Michael Joseph. It's kind of making sure that it connects to our overall message and that it's consistent. And day to day, there's just lots of things, lots of emails, lots of spinning plates. Some things are in the planning stages, some things are in the middle, and you kind of just have to make sure that everything's done and on time, I guess. Yeah, so there's always kind of lots going on, lots of moving parts all the time across all of those things. What skills would you say are useful for you to do your role? If we start with Melissa.
Yeah, so like I said before, be like a relationship building, being like a sort of a people person. I think again, a lot of people think that to work in sales you need to be an extrovert, which is absolutely not the case. You just need to be good at building relationships with people and getting them to trust you and trusting them in return. I would say that's a really key skill. If you think about you know, how many books a buyer at a retailer might see presented to them like every day or every week or every month, it's so many, because publishing is producing so much content and so many titles all the time. And sometimes what it comes down to is the relationship that the salesperson has with that buyer, and that's so important to build. And also, you know, because it is a sales job, we can't get away from the fact that data is a part of it, and looking at spreadsheets is part of it as well. I think looking at spreadsheets is actually part of everybody's job, so not just sales. And I wouldn't want anyone to feel put off if they don't feel like they're, you know, sort of very math literate or anything like that. First of all, because Excel can do a lot of the work for you, but also you learn how to do it. Basically, you know, you learn on the job, and you learn how to analyze these things and to pick out patterns and to put the data in something a bit more manageable, you figure out on the way, and that's what a good sales team will help you do as well.
Fantastic. Gaby?
I think the skills that are useful for my job are quite common to all sort of assistant roles. You need to be organised and have really good time management. Part of your job as an assistant is to keep the things running smoothly for the rest of your team. So making sure you can keep on top of things is really important. Also, making sure you've got like strong attention to detail, making sure everything's accurate, great communication, and also diplomacy skills in editorial. You're going to have to give feedback to people, and it might not always be positive feedback. So you've got to know how to deliver that in a nice way. And also, I think being able to take initiative and try and anticipate the needs of the rest of your team is really helpful in my role, because you are trying to help people out as much as possible. And if you can anticipate that and get there before they even ask you to do it, it just makes things run much more smoothly and quickly, which is really helpful.
Priyanka?
Yeah, I think Gaby pretty much said all of it. I think most assistant roles are pretty consistent across the board, but in my role in particular, I'd say that, like, similarly, it's really important to be diplomatic, and particularly when it comes to communicating, because in a comms role, surprise, surprise, you're going to be communicating with a lot of different people. So you might have book bloggers emailing you who are maybe a bit more informal when they chat, or you might have someone from like an international publication coming to you and saying, hi, we'd like to organize an interview for this author for this time. So I think it's really important to kind of try and match people's communication styles as well. And similarly, I think comms can also be about relationship building, but just in a slightly different way, because I think a lot of people don't even realize that, like, when you send an email, you're still building that relationship and building that trust with whoever is on the other line.
And Candy?
I want to echo Melissa and Gaby's points about good relationship building skills and diplomacy, particularly for when you're in a role like mine where we're looking at audience first and specifically looking at doing things that are of interest to young readers in particular. Often we do get people asking us about a book that might not be relevant to that audience. So in order to maintain that relationship and also say no, we do have to kind of balance the relationship building skills and the diplomacy skills. But other skills are things like research, being able to have a question, if someone asks a question of you, being able to kind of answer that question with clarity, as well as with imagination and creativity, I think is always really good. I think also analytical skills. We work with a lot of data, we work with a kind of crunching through a lot of figures as well as qualitative data. So being able to analyze that data and come up with theories as well as answers to questions that we might have, or at least strategies that we might want to implement, is really, really helpful in a role like mine, where we are looking to strategize and market to young people, or even any audience in particular. And I think just creativity, there's so much out there in terms of marketing. There's so many great campaigns, and I think being able to do the kind of all your kind of basic marketing skills, but also being able to cut through all the noise and make a difference to the audience that you're targeting is always really appreciated and always really good, and can yield a lot of great results for our books. So I think that's something that I'd also want to harp on about.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of a lot of what's been said is applicable for a lot of our roles, especially the diplomacy, organized, attention to detail. I think it's also worth saying, keeping a cool head. I think you will always make mistakes. That will happen at any job, at any level. And that kind of goes hand in hand with great communication. It's not about not making a mistake. It's about letting people know, okay, we've got this coming up. This has happened. This should have happened, but here's what we can do. And it's just about, I think keeping a cool head, knowing that you're not always going to know everything, and that you're going to learn, and kind of being open to that. Yeah, and then lots of analytics in my role as well. But there's so much stuff that you actually do learn on the job, and you always, I think, go into a role and ask questions when you don't know something. I think with the next few questions, just keeping in mind the time, if I read out the question, and then if you have something that you want to say or you think will be helpful, we'll work that way. So if you can describe to people the differences between the types of publishers. So for example, trade, academics, small publishers, both in terms of kind of how they work and the opportunities that they'll provide someone working there. So I can start. For example, before working at Penguin, or 2 jobs before that, I worked at Thames and Hudson. So they do a lot of art books, books with museums and whatnot. And it was a smaller company, but it meant in the marketing team, I wore a lot of hats, basically, in terms of sales, in terms of marketing, in terms of writing copy. So even though kind of on paper, a job at a smaller company might not seem as appealing, it does allow a lot of growth.
Yeah, I completely agree. My internship, and then I became publicity assistant, was at Atlantic Books, which is a small independent publisher. And I was the assistant for 3 publicists working across 4 imprints. So it was really, really busy, which was great. And you get to be stuck into lots of different things and maybe go to meetings you might not necessarily be invited to at a bigger publisher. But then at a bigger publisher like Penguin, you benefit from more sort of structured training and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a little bit of a mixture, and you kind of just have to work out what feels best for you, I think.
Fantastic. If we can talk about the regional opportunities, I think when people think of publishing, they think it's just London-based and you have to be living in London or from London. Have you guys found that that's the case, or have you found there's other opportunities?
I mean, there are definitely publishers who are opening offices outside of London, like Hachette. They've done that. And actually, with the pandemic, it does mean that we're not expected to be in the office 5 days a week. So, it depends on the publisher. It depends on your team as well, in terms of how many days they want you to do in the office. But it does allow for a bit more flexibility in terms of, where you can live. For the most part, though, let's be honest, most of the publishers are in London. There aren't that many that are based outside of here. And being able to, even if you don't live in London, being able to travel here it's on a weekly basis, it's definitely something that needs to be considered, at least for UK publishing anyway.
Yeah, because I was going to say in international sales, like half the team do not live in the UK. But even everyone on my team lives in the UK, and I think everyone on the team lives in a different part of the UK. And I think particularly when looking at international sales, because we're considered an agile team, which basically means people are moving around all the time, or like sales managers are going on trips. It's not a requirement to be in the office all the time. So just to echo Melissa's point, it's purely dependent on your team, I think.
Yeah, so I listed some publishers here. So we've got, these are publishers who either aren't based in London or have offices outside of London. Harper North, Bloomsbooks, Canongate, Edinburgh, the University Presses, Hachette have a regional office in Bristol. And the reason is I think, for the last 2 years, I've been based in East Sussex, and we'd only kind of come into London once a week. And even then it's not necessary. I think that if someone's kind of applying from outside of London, they should apply first and kind of think about commuting or working arrangements and whatnot later. I remember the first, I think the first internship I got, I was kind of over the moon. And then I realized I had to kind of figure out how I'm going to live in London or move to London and whatnot. So I don't think it should put you off applying. I think it's better to kind of apply first and work that out later, because it's always something that you can work out with your employer, especially now with remote working and whatnot.
Yeah. And I would also say, for if it's your first job in publishing as well, there is a benefit to being in the office, because you get to be and learn from so many other people. You know, remote working definitely has its benefits, but you know, if you want to work in publishing, you want to learn about publishing, being in an office does help sort of figure out like who different people are, being able to go for coffees with different people. It is different actually being here sometimes.
Absolutely. Can you, I guess the next question is, how is the industry looking to increase diversity, both in terms of its workforce and authors?
On our side of things for audio, a couple of things in terms of authors and content that we're looking at is, first of all, making sure that we're publishing more content by underrepresented voices and being really aware that there might not be what we call comps, so like titles that compare to those on available for those titles. There might not be a direct comparison, and that's okay, and we shouldn't just base sales figures and expectations on comparative titles. And we're also looking at making sure that when we're recording audiobooks, we're using own voices narrators to make sure we're diversifying our lists, both in terms of content and also who's performing the content. And then more generally in the industry, I think there are lots of great schemes and things. Penguin runs their scheme. It's not running this year, I don't think, but they normally run a scheme for underrepresented groups. Creative Access is obviously great for internships specifically. And in terms of retention, I think a lot of teams are just very aware of not just getting underrepresented groups into publishing, but also retaining those staff and looking at ways like through inclusion working groups and things for everyone to speak up and have an input on the best ways to do that. But I do think there's still quite a lot of work to do to get there with that. Like, it is happening, but it's not there yet for sure.
In addition to that, we also have a few talent acquisition programs like Right Now and the Creative Student Prize and the Murky Books Prize, which are all aimed at finding talent from marginalized backgrounds. And then we also, as like briefly mentioned before, we have a campaign called Lit in Colour, which is aimed at diversifying the curriculum. Yeah, and just one of the things that we do within our department is try to make sure that we work with a diverse number of booktokers and other influencers across book media. And that's really, really important to us. But as Gaby said, there is a lot of work to be done. And the industry, I feel like, especially because I was away from the industry for a few years and have come back in the last year, I do feel like the industry has changed and is making more of an effort, but I think there's still a lot to be done and a lot of work is ahead of us.
You might be entering the room as like the only person of color, or as the only queer person, or the only neurodivergent person. And I think it's just something to be aware of when you're thinking about applications.
Yeah. Okay. And then getting into the industry, what are the best ways to sell yourself on an internship application when you have little previous publishing experience?
So I would say, and I'm thinking specifically about sales, but I think this applies for any role. It's just thinking about what's working in the industry at the moment. You know, anyone can walk into a bookshop and see like what big displays are at the moment, or you can go onto Twitter and you can see what people are talking about at the moment. And I think what people really want to see in any application, whether it's for an internship or an entry-level job or whatever it may be, is like passion for books and a knowledge of what's happening out there at the moment, and showing that you're tapped into that and engaged in that. So any ways that you're able to talk about what's currently happening, what you can see, what you've noticed, what's caught your eye, what campaign has caught your eye, I think is always a really useful thing to have.
Yeah, I completely agree, Melissa. I think especially with the point you made about passion, like that's the one thing that they can't teach you. So that's the one thing you really need to get across in your applications. And a really good way to do that is also just to look at if you're applying to a specific publisher or division or imprint, not just what have they published that you love, but what are they going to be publishing that you might get to work on that you're excited about, is a really good way to get that across. And also just think about what your transferable skills are. You might not have the most publishing experience, but in my application for my internship, I talked about things like how working as a student ambassador at university gave me communication and event management skills. And it's using those sort of keywords and those buzzwords and learning what those are, which you'll do after you've done a few applications, and thinking about how you can put those in with what your experience is.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of I think for people, even if you're at university or you're currently looking for work or you're at work, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that you can start now. There's a lot of that kind of passion that you can kind of start now, whether it's a blog or TikTok or something that you do, even if you don't want to be in front of the camera, there's a lot where you can kind of just, like Melissa said, kind of take a deep dive into that community and kind of see what works. I mean, 5-10 years ago, people would never have thought of, I mean, I didn't even know if TikTok was around 5-10 years ago, but people never would have thought that would affect the charts, and it does. And, and everyone's trying to work backwards and unpack that and kind of see how that works. And if you're already kind of involved in that, you're coming in with that knowledge. So experience, experience does count, but experience doesn't necessarily mean that you've been in the office, and you don't have to wait until you get into the office in order to kind of have that on your CV. The other thing I would say, particularly for those people applying, is no two people's career path is exactly the same. So if someone's been applying for kind of 3 months and they've got something, and you've been applying for a year and you haven't got something, it's not to say that they're doing something better than you. It's just sometimes those opportunities take longer. I think for me, before I got my internship, it was kind of 9 months of applying and getting nothing, to the point where I had to double check my inbox was working. But you kind of just have to kind of keep going with that.
Sorry, I felt this is going to keep happening. Just to add on to that, I just want to say that from like a marketing and publicity perspective as well, booktok is absolutely huge right now. If you have TikTok skills, highlight it on your CV. Even if you've only made like silly TikToks in your bedroom, people will probably want to hear about it and know that you know how to use the app and you know how to navigate it. I had no prior publishing experience before I got my job. I did a lot of kind of publishing adjacent stuff, and one of those was starting a bookstagram and starting a book blog. And you can also use that to help get publishing industry connections as well. Like when I got rejected from jobs, what I would do is email the people afterwards and say, hi, thank you so much for interviewing me. Could I please get a review copy for my blog? And that way you're also able to consolidate that connection and not just let it go by as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially in terms of learning and actively seeking that. I mean, even if you do get an internship or an opportunity to work at a publisher's or at a bookshop, in terms of the work you're doing that for them. And in terms of the CV, that's for you, and that carries forward. But you can also use the opportunity to ask any and every question that would come to mind. And I think that's kind of the best use of that time, whether it's a 6-month internship, a week, or you're at a bookshop, you're having a conversation with someone, just ask whatever question comes to mind, just to make sure that you're getting the most out of that opportunity, whether it's on a CV or not. Do you need a degree full stop, and does it put you at a disadvantage not having one?
No, I don't think you need a degree at all. I think it comes back to what I think Gaby, you said earlier about transferable skills. I think that's the most important thing. I've done like hiring for a couple of roles over the past couple of years, and I'm never looking at degree experience. I'm looking at how that person on the page has showed an interest in books, an interest in publishing. If they've got experience in publishing, great. If they haven't, what do they have that's adjacent, or even outside of the industry completely, that can transfer over to the job that they're applying for now? That is what I'm more interested in when I'm hiring, more than anything else.
Yeah, I think also, oh sorry,
I was about to say I agree. Yeah, go for it, Gabby.
I was going to say I completely agree. I don't think you need a degree. And also, as well as just going straight into a publishing job, there are now publishing apprenticeships that are also worth a look if you'd like to learn on the job and still get a qualification. There's now also that route is quite new. So worth having a Google and looking into that way of getting into the industry as well.
Fantastic. What's your advice for changing careers and moving into publishing from jobs which are unrelated to publishing? I can go first on this one. So I came from pharmacy and I wanted to move into something creative and I wasn't really sure how to go about that. And I got in touch with Creative Access. It was a really nice conversation, nice interview. And then I started my internship in publishing, and it was pretty much that attitude of kind of learn everything you can. I think I went through and kind of just grabbed a coffee with everyone from every department and just kind of found out how everything worked and how everything kind of connected together. I think the thing to keep in mind is whenever you are looking to move industries, you are going to, in a sense, start again, in the sense that you're going to have a more junior role. It will affect your salary, and I think once you have that in mind, it won't come as a surprise. But I would say Creative Access is, I mean, for me, that's the route I took, so that's what I would recommend, or an internship in general. Yeah. What about you guys?
I think, so if you asked someone who's looking to change careers, I think it would just be in terms of making those applications, just focusing on your enthusiasm for books specifically and those transferable skills as Gabby has talked about before. I wouldn't let it put you off applying, and I think I know people in the industry and within my team who have been reporters and teachers before, and really I think it's just going to be focusing on your skills transference and as well as your interest and enthusiasm in the industry. I think it's quite different, and I think a lot of recruiters actually quite enjoy getting that kind of perspective, and as do other hiring managers. So definitely don't let it put you off.
I'm just going to jump in here because we've got over 50 questions from the audience and you guys are doing the most phenomenal job at answering these. We could listen to you for hours, but sadly, we've only got about 20 more minutes left. Some fantastic answers. I'm going to pick on some of you individually just to follow up, and there are some specific questions for some of you. One of the questions, we talked about a degree. One of the questions is, what's your view on a publishing MA? Because obviously a lot of people are trying to do it to make themselves stand out, see the benefits of it. But there's a few people saying, like, you know, should I, shouldn't I? So has anyone on the panel done a publishing MA? Yes. So Priyanka, would you like to give us tell us the good things about doing it?
Yeah, so I think the good things were that I learned kind of like the basics about publishing, and it kind of helped with my publishing vocabulary. So I remember when my first role, which I forgot to mention, was I was a PR and admin assistant at another division at PRH UK first. And when I first joined, people were saying like, oh, we're going to publish this in hardback before we do paperback, or oh, we're going to run this campaign and use POS. And having done a master's degree, I was like, oh, I can kind of pick up on those words and infer what's happening. So I think that kind of helped as a starting point. But I'd say my overall opinion is you probably don't need it, because like Mubarak and everyone has said, you will pick up so much stuff naturally on the job. And even if you feel like you know something, you'll wait a week and be like, I didn't realize that was a thing. And I'm sure like even now, everyone here can say there's still stuff that they don't know, and there's still stuff that they're learning as well.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Malissa, I'm just going to pick up with you because you have been doing quite a fair bit of hiring. So you talked about CVs. A lot of people have asked here, what about covering letters? And do you have any specific advice? How do you tailor it? How do you make yourself stand out, especially when you're an organisation like Penguin Random House is going to be getting hundreds of applications?
Yeah, I've read quite a few cover letters recently. They are really important, I would say, because that's where you get to put your personality on the page, and that's what we want to see. We want to see your personality, we want to see your passion, as lots of people have mentioned here already, and we want to see, you know, how you're able to sort of articulate yourself on those kind of things as well. So I think it's really important, again, to get that passion across. Mention things that you're reading. If you are coming from outside of publishing, or you haven't got sort of previous career in publishing, again, thinking about those transferable skills and sort of articulating a little bit around that, and why whatever transferable skill you're talking about applies to the job that you're currently putting an application for. You'd be amazed at how many people don't change up their cover letters that much between applying for jobs, and don't tailor it to the job that they're applying for, which, as someone recruiting, is really frustrating. We want to see why you want to apply for this specific job. So, and I know it can be quite, you know, when you're putting out lots and lots of applications, it can get quite tiring, get quite difficult, but always tailoring it to the job that you're applying for is so critical, and getting that passion across is so critical as well.
Thank you, that's helpful. And then the next step from that is, a few people have asked us about, if you're lucky enough to get an interview, how do you prepare yourselves for an interview? And what specifically, we've had somebody saying, how do you answer the question, demonstrate your problem solving skills? Can any of you get a good example of that answer? So interview preparation, and the perennial question, demonstrate your problem solving skills.
Oh no, if anyone else wants to talk, please go ahead, but I can also talk.
Go for it, Melissa.
Okay. In terms of the problem solving skills, I think, you know, at most points in our life, everyone has been in a situation where they've had to solve a problem. And if you've just got one example that you prepared in your head, and that can be from anything from like a Saturday job, you know, if you worked in whatever job as a teenager, you'll have inevitably had to solve a problem at some point, and being able to pull on that is really helpful. It might be something during your studies, you know, time management or something like that. That's also a really good example that I've heard people use in interviews. So I think, you know, just think, if you haven't had any experience specifically in an office or an office job or anything like that, think outside of the box in that sense, because we'll all have solved problems in our life, and you know, people aren't interested in the problem itself necessarily. It's about your steps and how you went about solving it. It's about your process, and that's what you know, an interviewer is more interested in hearing. And in terms of prep for an interview, I'll let someone else answer.
How I prep for an interview, in case it's helpful, is I will go through the job ad and pick out all the keywords and skills they're looking for, and kind of make a note myself of examples of when I've demonstrated those skills. And I tend to follow the STAR framework. So you talk about the situation, the task, your action, and what the result of that was. And that's really helpful. I also think more generally with interviews, especially when you're first trying to get into the industry, it can be really intimidating, but you have to remember that an interview is a conversation both ways. And not only is it a chance for you to find out if the job's for you, but it's also, you have to bear in mind that they want you to be the right person for the job. Like, they want to hire someone, they've got this position and they want you to be the person. So if you just bear that in mind, I find that always helps me with nerves a little bit. I'm quite an anxious person, so just focusing on those sorts of things also helps get rid of the jitters and makes it feel a bit more of a smooth process.
Thank you, Gaby, that's really helpful. Specific question here from somebody saying, what sort of role would you recommend to somebody who's interested in research?
I mean, we've got an audience insight team who work specifically with research. So that would be quantitative, qualitative, it would be focus groups, it would be looking at the market. It'd be kind of pooling all of that data and kind of looking based on a particular genre or format, or comparing an author to another genre. So yes, there's something in terms of that, but PRH is quite large. So I mean, this is the first company I've worked at where they have a whole division in terms of audience insight. Where that would sit in terms of other publishers would be in terms be in marketing. So there'll be a lot of analytics in marketing. Yeah, that's me, a marketer selling marketing. But yeah.
Thank you. That's a good. A lot of people talking about social media, and particularly BookTok and TikTok, which you've spoken about, saying like, I've got one nice question here. What's your favorite BookTok campaign? Anyone got one that jumps out?
My favorite BookTok campaign, which I talked about at my interview, actually was one for a book called The Other Black Girl, where the BookToker, she actually like started talking about the story of the book as if it had happened to her, and it was so intriguing, and I was like, oh my god, what is this tea? This is crazy, only to find out it was a book. And I immediately was like, wow, I'm gonna have to get that. So that was a really, and obviously quite a few people have done that, and it's not an unusual BookTok trend now, but I still fall for it every time, and it does help me. It does really like get me intrigued and sells me on the concept almost immediately. So I'd say that's my favorite BookTok campaign.
So slightly related, but not quite. A lot of people saying, is it helpful to have a social media presence or a blog or something, or Bookstagram when you're applying for roles? Do you think it is? Do you think it's
I think it's helpful to have an eye on social media to kind of see what moves the needle, what's selling, what are people doing. So it's less about your output, more your understanding. So it's good to have one in order to see, but not necessarily to have a large following or have something like that.
Great.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you want to add something?
No, I was going to say, because I think we do work with a lot of BookTokers, and I think it's great, and some of them do have an interest in the industry, but I would definitely say it's your understanding of how that affects the industry and how that affects sales, if it does at all, and the community itself. Understanding of that is, I think, more important than your actual profile.
Great. The questions that have been upvoted the most, there's a lot around internships. Do you need to do an internship, or is it fine to apply for a job straight out?
When I first started applying for publishing jobs, I had absolutely no publishing experience. All my experience was kind of publishing adjacent. So I did an internship at a small magazine for free. I did a lot of volunteering in like an Oxfam bookshop as well. I ran like an open mic, and that was all stuff that I did straight out of uni, just while I was applying for jobs. So I'd say try and take advantage if you're straight out of uni and you have some time, see what you can do with that time to kind of build those skills before you apply for internships, because it's not necessarily about having, like so many people have said, about having publishing experience. It's about having the transferable skills that are more important. And if you've actually done stuff at uni as well, like I brought in my experience of being like the Literary Society vice president as well, that can be super helpful too.
Brilliant, thank you. And keeping it real, which we like to do, because we know that not everybody is lucky enough to come and work for an organisation like Penguin Random House. So a couple of specific questions. One here about what might opportunities for growth look like once you've secured an entry-level role? Like, really passionate about getting into the industry, but so many entry-level roles on low-level salaries, which is discouraging. What's the progression pathway like within the industry? Anyone want to give that a stab?
I think it honestly depends on the department that you work in as well. I think Gaby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think something like editorial can be quite slow moving in a way in terms of progression, because it requires someone to move out of a role for someone else to then move up, and then it's the sort of chain reaction from that. Whereas I think like in my area, something like sales, I think it's you've got so many opportunities to move into different areas of sales as well. It's not just UK sales, you've got international, digital, you've got sales ops, you've got like inventory, you've got all sorts of areas that you could move in and out of to help move up an organization. And obviously there's lots of different areas as well. You've got adult and children's publishing as well. So I think there's more opportunities in sales. I mean, I'm probably very biased, But I think there's maybe more flexibility in sales to sort of move around and have sort of a fast progression through an organization rather than something like editorial. But do correct me if anyone thinks I'm wrong.
Well, that's actually really interesting, Melissa, and related to that, which somebody else might want to pick up, and is people have asked about work-life balance and whether that varies. It appears to vary between departments. If there's certain ones where if you struggle with, too much or deadlines, or so what's the kind of work-life balance if you have a perception? Obviously you only work in your own role, but for those of you that want to give that a go.
I think, for example, with something like publicity, the work-life balance is kind of like you might have to work evenings sometimes, because if you've organized an event that is happening in the evening, you might have to take the author to the event, or you might have to help with the setup, and that can kind of run sometimes even into weekends depending on the event. But I think PRH UK is quite good as a company in being aware of that. But I think it's, like everyone has said, it's so dependent on your team, because sometimes publicists will be able to, like, if you're working a weekend, get a day off in lieu. But I know other teams where the expectation is that they're just kind of meant to work on the weekends. But that's publicity mostly, not the company as a whole.
Yeah, I'd agree with publicity. When I used to work in publicity, you are expected to do those evening events and that kind of thing. In editorial, there can be an expectation, from what I've heard from other people, that a lot of the reading will happen outside of work. But as someone with anxiety, that's why audio particularly suits me really well, because you can do the listening while you're doing other things, which you can't do with print books. So that's an advantage of audio publishing, and maybe a reason to look into it is I find my work, like, I do just work 9:30 till 5:30, and then I shut my laptop and that's it for the day, pretty much every day. As you get higher up and you're dealing more with authors and agents, you need to be more contactable, because sometimes some authors and agents might need a bit of hand holding, but generally audio seems to have a really great work-life balance, and is one of the reasons I really enjoy it.
Great advocate there. And I'm also a new convert to audiobooks, so I'm very excited about that. So somebody has said this might sound silly, which it doesn't. I think it's a very good question. So whoever wrote that, it doesn't sound silly, but they're saying there's a lot of, are there any Northerners? Everyone I hear speak to in publishing seems to have a Southern accent.
There are definitely Northerners.
Yeah, we've got some Northerners on our team,
Quite a few.
on our department, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I would add to that is the accent, there is a sort of people shifting their accents to sound a bit more London does happen. That is real as well. So you may not actually realise some people are Northern just because that's a whole nother conversation. We won't go there, but there are definitely Northerners. Okay. Couple of other things. Just looking through, there's so many questions here, and I know that we've hardly got any time left. Somebody has said, good question here. How long do I keep going for? When do I give up? So we've got a few people saying that. At what point do we say, and I guess that's a very personal decision, but if anyone's got a word.
Is that in terms of applying?
Yes, I've tried for a year, haven't got in, is one question. Somebody else saying, how long is too long? When do I just call it quits?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the second you call it quits is when you've kind of cemented that it will never happen, and it's something that will never happen in your life. So if that's a decision that you want to make, then you have to kind of understand that. But I think what's better than doing that is taking a break. I mean, I think that long stretch I described of kind of 9 months until I got something, there was kind of a break halfway through where I just didn't apply and didn't do anything, and we just kind of took a break from that and kind of came back again. The thing to keep in mind is that it's not like all the other cycles that you've been in terms of school, university and whatnot, where there is something like that. Sometimes a wave of opportunities will come near the beginning of the year, sometimes there'll be nothing, sometimes 3 people would want to hire you, sometimes no one else. So you just have to, I would recommend taking a break rather than stopping altogether if you're at that point.
Thanks, Mubarak. And then related to that, a few people are saying, if you're struggling to get in, what publishing adjacent roles would you recommend that are useful as an eventual segue into publishing?
Just working in a bookshop count as publishing adjacent, or is that just publishing? Because I like my yeah.
I
don't know.
I would say,
I would
Yeah.
definitely say, yeah. I think
Yeah.
success would be all right.
My whole career in publishing started as a Christmas temp. at a Waterstones as a Saturday job, like however many years ago. And that was so, so useful. Again, in picking up the basics of like books and formats and ISBNs and how things work, but also just like knowing what's happening in the market and knowing what's selling, and you know, earn a bit of money as well. So that was really, really handy. Actually just working in a bookshop.
Brilliant.
Can I just add to that as well? Like if you are interested in a marketing role in publishing, for example, I think you can go and work in marketing in another organization, working on the discipline, even if you're not working in books, working on the discipline of the role, whether it be sales, publicity, marketing. I know editorial is kind of a bit more specific, but you can still work on the discipline in other industries and keep applying. And as Mubarak said, even like, no, every journey is different, and you could, even with employers and how budgets kind of get approved for roles, like in kind of happens in cycles during the year. So please don't give up, and even if you take a break from it for maybe for a couple of months, please do come back to it.
I'd also just want to add that when I was applying for jobs, my work experience was extremely minimal, but what I did instead was a lot of volunteering, a lot of like volunteering at an Oxfam bookshop, volunteering at magazines. I'd also highly recommend looking up the Publishing Post. They do like have great volunteer opportunities as well, and trying to upskill yourself at the same time. So like I tried to teach myself Photoshop and InDesign, because those were skills that I had learned that you might need in publishing as well. I did a lot of like online courses about publicity and marketing too, a lot of free webinars, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I would just double down on what Priyanka said. I think at any stage, whether you're going into publishing or you want to kind of move up in a role, look up the job you want, look at what they're asking, and find how to get that, whether it's something you're doing online, whether it's something you do in practice. You don't have to have a certificate that says you can do that. You just need to learn how to do that. And if you're at the job, ask them for opportunities in order to kind of get that exposure to that thing, all those things.
Thank you. Apologies to all of you, because there's still so many great, fantastic questions and lots of individual questions wanting to know about sales and about marketing, but we just, I'm sure that if you want to tweet our panelists, they will do their best to come back to you. But there's also tons of other resources, which I'll come on to in a moment. Quick question, literally, because we're dead on time, which I think is quite interesting. Somebody has asked, sometimes publishing houses advertise multiple opportunities at one time. Does it disadvantage you to apply for more than one?
Yes.
Okay, that's a great short answer. Lots of shaking heads there. Fantastic. So I'm just going to wrap up, ask each of you to please give your one top tip to people that are applying for a role. So a quick line from each of you. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. I'll say when you get your interview, because you will get an interview. When you get an interview, take a deep breath, relax, stay calm, have a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. Just chat. That's all it is.
Great tip. Melissa?
I would, for an interview, always have one example of something that another publisher has done that you really admired, or you really take a notice of, because every interviewer appreciates someone who is paying attention to the market. Good
tip. Gaby?
My tip would be, and it really helped me throughout my application process, don't be afraid to reach out to people who work in publishing on social media. I spoke to someone who worked in production about their Instagram account, and one of the recruiters at Penguin was offering interview advice on Twitter. So I sent them a message and said, I'm not even getting to interview, please can you sit with me and go through my application? And she did, and then the next job I applied for was the job I have now. And people in publishing generally are really nice, so just speak to people, learn as much as you can about the industry, and don't be afraid of reaching out to everyone.
Very good advice. Priyanka?
Mine is sort of more like a pep talk than a tip, but don't give up. It will take a while. Everyone's journey is different. Eventually the rejections will just seem like anything else, and you'll be able to move on to the next one.
And last but not least, Candy?
Mine is just to be specific in your application. So make sure that you're kind of matching your points in your applications to every line in the job description. And lastly, just believe in your own voice and value what you have to say, because the industry does want you.
Wow, I'm quite emotional. Really, really amazing tips, all of you. I mean, you are just so fantastic, our panel. I'm really, really grateful to all of you for participating, and thank you for all our everyone who's joined us for the webinar. It's really, really gratifying to have such an overwhelming response to putting on an event like this, and we do hope to be putting on many more in the future. So, you know, please keep an eye on our website. I've put a few resources up here. We're going to be publishing this webinar on our YouTube channel, and also writing up a note which we will email to everybody that's signed up with lots of these resources, some of which are on here. Please do follow us and follow obviously the PRH Careers UK Twitter account. There's always opportunities on our site. The Penguin Random House himself have got all sorts of fantastic resources about the sorts of roles there are, the publishing process, and you know, there are lots of resources on the Publishers Association's own website. So thank you all for joining us. Please stay in touch, and thank you hugely to our amazing panel. I really have just loved listening to all of you. You're truly inspiring, and good luck for whatever you'll do next, and good luck to all of you watching. We are looking forward to seeing you enter and thrive in the industry. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.